Welcome to the Castle of Spirits podcast, the audio companion to the long-running castleofspirits.com, where you can read 4,600 and counting true paranormal stories submitted by listeners just like you. Again, there with the Paranormal PBS.
We are the Paranormal PBS of the interwebs.
Hey, Vince.
Hey, Jane.
This is episode number 8 of the podcast. How do you feel about that?
I'm feeling quite accomplished that we were able to soldier through 8 recording sessions without murdering one another.
Right. It got close a few times.
I do believe the spirits of the castle are helping keep things fun.
Mm-hmm. And spooky.
Well, yeah, it's the same thing.
Oh.
And I credit them for saving us from ourselves.
What does that mean?
From not killing each other.
Oh, gotcha. So we got our first listener email.
No way.
Yeah.
Who's it from?
It is from David, and he was responding to episode 6 about the creature in the story Out Past the Shadow's Edge.
Episode 6, Here There Be Cryptids.
Yes, that one. And he says, in episode 6, the Mormon cricket man sounds to be an awful lot like a Wendigo. Often portrayed with backwards knees, they are shapeshifters that try to look human and are depicted as not doing a very good job. They are also known to haunt Utah. So, interesting. I did not know that the Wendigo was a thing that was known to be seen around here. So, maybe I'll have to look into that a little bit more.
So, that story Out Past the Shadow's Edge, I did a little bit of research. I rummaged through the castle files. And that story was submitted circa 1999.
Oh, wow.
The guy in the story mentions that it had happened about 15 years earlier. So we're talking about the 80s. Do you ever remember hearing stories in the 80s about cricket men, Wendigo type beings?
I was pretty young in the 80s. So if I would have heard anything like that, it probably would have damaged my young psyche, which I already had a friend tormenting me with stories of La Llorona. So thank you, David, for sending us that email. And if anyone else has information or whatever, we want emails. Will you please email us? Please. You can either do so on castleofspirits.com/contact, or you can email us directly at cosghostkeepers@gmail.com. Please.
So now that begs the obvious question. What is a Wendigo? I'm not exactly sure.
A Wendigo is a spirit. So the Wikipedia article, which we will link in the show notes, says that a Wendigo is a mythological creature or evil spirit originating from the folklore of Plains and Great Lakes natives, as well as some First Nations. And it looks like it's mostly based around, it says, East Coast forests of Canada. It's often said to be a malevolent spirit, sometimes depicted as a creature with human-like characteristics, and it can possess humans. It's said to invoke feelings of insatiable greed or hunger and the desire to cannibalize other humans. So a really nice creature.
Hold it right there.
Okay.
Because one of our favorite movies of all time is called Ravenous. It's a movie with Guy Pearce. It's from the late 90s, right?
1999.
Right. And in that movie, not to give anything away, but there's cannibalism.
Yeah.
And there is reference by a Native American in the movie to a Wendigo. And this takes place
in California.
Right. It takes place on the Sierra. No.
Yeah. It's in the Sierra Nevadas. They don't really, they name the fort that they're at, but I don't think they ever get real specific with where they're supposed to be. But yeah, we always watch that movie at Thanksgiving.
It's definitely a Thanksgiving feast type movie if you are a sicko.
We're not that. Don't put it in their heads that we're like really totally demented. We just like
cozy
sicko movies.
Cozy, sicko, snowbound movies about weird stuff that happens.
It is very cozy, and I do love a cozy movie, where it all takes place in kind of one location. If you've never seen Ravenous, we'll put it in the attic on castleofspirits.com. You should definitely check it out. It's a fun watch. Who's all in it? It's Guy Pearce and
Robert Carlyle.
Yeah, Robert Carlyle. And David Arquette is in it.
Jeremy Davies.
Yeah, Jeremy Davies and Ed Rooney.
Rooney.
Oh, Jeffrey Jones. Yeah. But anyway, there's a big long cast, and we just think that you should watch the movie.
All right, what's kind of cool and synchronous about the fact that we got that email from David, and of course it was because you read that story, is that I had planned already to read from the new batch of stories that we received for October of 2022.
Right.
And the story that I chose to read has to do with the Wendigo.
No. Really?
Yeah.
That's so weird. That's a really weird coincidence, I guess.
There are no coincidences.
How was that again? No coincidences.
There are no coincidences in the castle. Did I say coincidences wrong?
Coincidences.
All right, forget it. Ain't no coincidences. Wow, I can't say that. I can't say the word, so I'm editing that out.
No, you're not. You better leave that in.
No, it's out. It's out.
Mm-mm.
Verbal misspeaks must go.
No, they're in. Anyway, so what's your story called?
It's called Wendigo in the Quantico Highlands with a question mark. It was submitted by Anonymous in Quantico, Virginia, and I will endeavor to read the story without any such verbal misspeaks. But I'm pretty sure he doesn't say the word
coincidences.
Coincidi.
Coincidipodes.
All right. Let's get serious now. It's time for a story reading from the Castle of Spirits Library. It's called Wendigo in the Quantico Highlands. While undergoing military training in Quantico, Virginia in 2011, I was sleeping in the field with the rest of my platoon. We used to somewhat jokingly call this area the Quantico Highlands. During the training, we would often sleep in the woods for a week or so at a time. One night, probably around 3 a.m., we were awakened by the sound of some bipedal creature running and shrieking by our sight. None of us were able to get visual contact, but what we heard was nothing like any creature that lives in these woods. It was going far too fast. It sounded way too heavy, and it was too loud to be any normal bird or critter that lives around here. Our first thought, collectively, was that perhaps it was one of the instructors playing a trick on us. But that thought was quickly debunked, just based on the speed and the noise. There was no way that a human could have made that awful, blood-curdling, dinosaur-like shriek. The next few days, and upon returning from the field, it was a hot topic of conversation. One of the individuals in our platoon suggested, based on his reading and understanding of American Indian lore, that it could have been a Wendigo. To this day, I have never seen or heard of anything that would have perhaps met that description better. Again, that was Wendigo in the Quantico Highlands, submitted by Anonymous from Quantico, Virginia, October 2022. So really, up until this very moment, or until a few minutes ago, when you read that bit about the Wendigo mainly being a part of East Coast Native American lore, I just had always assumed from movies that I've seen, from like 90s movies. I think there was a movie in the 90s called The Wendigo, or maybe the early 2000s. We've never seen it.
Yeah. I think, there's probably a few of them.
But to my understanding, that movie takes place in the Old West. So I've always associated Wendigos with
More like Western.
Yeah, with Western, native folklore.
Mm-hmm.
But now apparently we've got Wendigos.
We got Wendigos on the east, Wendigos on the west.
Coast to coast Wendigos 24/7, apparently.
All Wendigo all the time.
Hey, we're about ready for FM now, aren't we?
Oh, I think that's the name of the podcast, isn't it? That's the name of this episode. All Wendigo all the time.
All right. That sounded bad. All right. I sounded like an overexcited old aunt who's about to fall over and break her ankle, seeing a bird.
I really loved the imagery in that story, though. What I really love about reading some of these stories is when they're nice and short, like that one, but then they like punch you in the face with just like one little bit of flavor that's absolutely terrifying. Like in that story, the running and shrieking through the campground in the middle of the night, that's terrifying. Because I think that typically if you think of, okay, if you were to tell someone, okay, so you imagine that it's the middle of the night and you're sleeping in a tent in a campground and something scary starts to happen outside of your tent. What do you think? What do you imagine is happening? Probably there's something creepy tiptoeing. There's something creepy just kind of lumbering about,
Did I ever tell you my experience spending the night in Tahoe National Forest in the open bed of my pickup truck?
I want to say that you have, but I don't remember.
Well, it wasn't anything necessarily cryptidish, I don't think.
Well, a Wendigo's not a cryptid, it's a spirit.
Right, but it was just a night of terror for me. And I had to fold myself up in that terror because I was sleeping with a small group of campers comprised of my friend, his father, and his father's friend. I'm not somebody who ever grew up in campgrounds or in the woods. For the most part, the environment of my youth was mainly indoors. So this was a new environment for me. One of the first things we heard as we decided to sleep in the open bed of my pickup truck with sleeping bags. It got really cold, but we made it through the night. However, my sanity almost didn't make it through the night. I remember the first thing we heard was the sound of coyotes doing their cackling call, which was especially for somebody who doesn't spend a lot of time outdoors, it was terrifying.
I remember the first time we heard coyotes when we were camping. It's a haunting. Even though you can tell what it is, what it is, it's a scary sound.
Well, I didn't know what it was back then. I looked at my friend, I was like, what was that? And I don't remember what he said, but he might have said nothing. But no matter what, it sounded like a bunch of demons down by the water's edge who were converging and getting together and talking about coming up and taking our souls.
Yeah. There were some breakfast burritos in a truck up the hill.
Teenage breakfast burritos.
Yeah.
And of course that went away. I think we actually might have thought they were wolves. Like a wolf pack or something. But anyway. Then as the night wore on, I'm already uneasy. And I was hearing sounds all throughout our campsite. I remember hearing what I thought were footsteps making a circle around the truck. And the worst part about it was that this was a short bed pickup truck. So we had the tailgate open with our shoes sitting on the edge and our feet kind of dangling close to the edge. And basically I just laid there for most of the night in sheer terror, expecting something to eat my feet. Or
you didn't look to see what was walking around?
No friggin' way was I going to open my eyes or do any of that. I was terrified. I thought it was either some sort of bear who would eat me the minute it saw me, or the worst part was a serial killer with an axe.
But because you didn't look at him, he decided to let you live.
Right.
Cool.
I mean, it was probably raccoons, but there was something walking around that campsite, and it scared me. And I don't even know if this is worth sharing.
It's worth sharing.
But
because lots of people have talked about, hearing something walking circles around them in the middle of the night while camping. I mean, that's one of the things that people talk about with Bigfoot, about it circling their campground. And
it might have been Bigfoot.
I mean, it could have been. I think raccoons are noisy. I mean, I guess they could come into your campground and walk around, but they are, curious, and they cause mischief. They're going to rifle through things, try and climb on things. They talk to each other. They've got those little hands, and they like to put their hands all over everything because from what I understand, they're mostly blind. So they touch things so that they can tell what they are. And I think if it were a raccoon, you would have experienced more than just hearing it walking around, I think.
I think maybe the reason I brought that story up was because I didn't really think that it was anything supernatural. I just was freaked out by the sound. And so I'm wondering, I mean, again, I welcome these topics and these discussions and these stories and stuff like that.
Experiences.
And experiences. But I question them too. I mean, what else could have possibly made that sound? I mean, are there wild horses in the Quantico Highlands that could have, something could have come charging through the site where they were doing their camping and whinnied or something? If you hear it in the middle of the night, it could sound like a screech.
Okay, but if a horse is going to go tearing through a campground screaming in the middle of the night, that's terrifying too, because horses don't just decide to do that in the middle of the night. There's something else after it, and you got to be worried about what's behind the horse. So, I mean, that's still scary, but...
Yeah, like if you see the tigers running out of the jungle, you're like, what are they running from?
That's true, yeah.
So, question.
Answer.
Do you believe in the Wendigo? I mean, what do you think? What do you make of all that?
Oh, of course.
Really?
Yeah, of course. I think I believe in just about all of it. Like the whole paranormal spectrum. I don't know that we understand any of these things and that we have it right. You know what I mean? I don't think that we can actually say, this is what a Wendigo is. And, because it's not something that's been scientifically studied. But, I mean, these stories come from somewhere. There's something out there causing all of these stories. And maybe it's not what we've labeled it as. Maybe it's not exactly that. But there's something, yeah. What about you?
I don't know. It's like with things like Bigfoot, I really don't know where I stand on that. I mean, I have great respect for the folklore and the mythology of all cultures that date back tens of thousands of years. But whether I believe that these are based on actual creatures, or if they are just the product of imagination, and that imagination can take root in people's psyches to the point where they can actually see something that or hear something that may not be there. I think I'm more fascinated with that concept than I am with the idea that maybe there are like these mysterious creatures that roam the earth and terrorize people. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's a topic worthy of thought.
Well, that's kind of a chicken or egg question, right? Do we have these stories because experiences needed some kind of an interpretation and imagination came into play? Or do we have these stories because imagination came into play and therefore caused people to interpret experiences like this? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's an interesting... I think that they go hand in hand. I think there's definitely a lot of interpretation and looking for answers that brings us to conclusions. You know, it was a ghost, it was a Bigfoot, it was a Wendigo, it was time travel, you know, whatever it was. But where did those concepts even come from in the first place? I mean, did somebody just imagine, oh, a ghost, it's the spirit of a dead person, and that just caught on like wildfire? Or does that belief that that's what these experiences that we're calling ghosts are, does that come from something factual? You know, the saying about there's a grain of truth in every story or in every legend. Or
but when a legend becomes the size of an ocean and the basis of it is just a grain,
mm-hmm.
it could very well be something very mundane.
For sure.
I mean, I think sometimes about, like you asked the question, where did the first ghost story come from?
Mm-hmm.
And if I were pressed to answer that question, I would venture to guess that it was the manifestation of grief
mm-hmm.
that caused the very first ghost sighting, if there ever was a very first ghost sighting,
Yeah.
But I've known people who have lost people and have seen them
mm-hmm.
under circumstances that are more than likely explained away as a dream or as something that they wanted to see. And maybe they saw some blurry shape through their tears and they immediately ascribed an identity to that shape of their deceased loved one.
Or something that you and I have experienced a few times, when we've lost a pet, is for, a few days or even a few weeks afterwards, still hearing that pet breathing or walking around the house, or in your case, touching you.
Oh man. If that was that, yeah, I remember that. And I was at the kitchen table. It was a couple days after our dog died. And does the dog have a name? Of course, I'm going to tell Boris. And I'm sitting at the kitchen table and I felt what I would describe as a dog coming and putting his head on my lap like he did.
Yeah, Boris did that a lot.
Yeah. And I felt that. And it's because there was nothing there. It startled me. And I sort of like batted at my leg and said, get out of here.
Aww.
And then, of course, I immediately...
Poor Boris. He's all sad in the afterlife because Daddy rejected him.
Shut up. But yet, I'm just superstitious enough to have immediately called it back and said, I'm sorry. It's okay. You can hang out. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay. But that initial rejection of...
Well, yeah, it's something you don't... It's
of the
unfamiliar.
unexplained.
Yeah.
It's like the time right after my grandmother died. And we were all there at, the house, my parents' house. And a bird got into the house
mm-hmm.
and started flitting about the house. And while everybody was standing there watching this thing in absolute awe, like, oh, I think it could be her spirit, I'm the idiot who's going and getting a broom.
Aww.
To bat this thing
Get
out
out,
of the
Grandma.
house. Now, I never got a chance to use the broom because
Good.
it took off. It came into the house and then it left.
Yeah.
And that is
She's
interesting.
As she flies off, you were my least favorite grandchild.
But I think I have a tendency to do that, to sort of reject things that in the very beginning as potentially supernatural.
Well, you're a guy.
And immediately go to the logical explanation or the logical consequences, saying, oh my God, bird flu just came into the house. Now we're all going to die too.
Bird flu.
So here I am. I'm going to save the day with a broom.
Well, I'm sure your family was very thankful that you saved them from an avian-inflicted death.
Or a ghost.
Or a ghost. You saved them from your grandmother, who seemed like a very nice person.
Now, we don't know what the human soul, mind, whatever, goes through at the time of death, and it could turn somebody potentially evil. You never know. Let's just let them go on, go through the light.
So now you're supposing that your grandmother became evil?
All are welcome. Go into the light.
All right. Well, on that note...
Hopefully my mother never hears this.
Since you are bringing up ghosts, we're turning the tide from Wendigo to ghosts, it might be a good time for me to read my story, because my story is a good old-fashioned ghost story.
No say.
Mm-hmm. This story actually comes from the very first October that the Castle of Spirits was in existence. My story comes all the way from October of 1997.
Oh.
This story is 25 years old today.
Whoa.
Well, I mean, technically, this story is 100 and... doing some quick math in my head. This story is actually about 168 years old.
How do you figure?
Well, let me tell you. The Mistress, submitted by Anonymous in Ohio, USA, October 1997. My mother's side of the family came from England, and there's an interesting story attached to one of our relatives, a housekeeper to a certain Lord Breckley. My story begins in 1856. Lord Breckley was a wealthy lord and owned a vast estate and several houses, including his London townhouse, at which he resided most of the time. Lord Breckley was a foul-tempered man, and he was said to have treated everyone horribly, from servants to family to other lords and ladies of his own estate. This included his mistress. His mistress was a small, wiry girl, many years his junior, of Scottish descent and very beautiful. It was rumored that she was the bastard daughter of a nobleman and a Scottish girl. Her name was Ailey. Ailey had been Lord Breckley's mistress for about 6 years, when one night everyone in the house heard an ear-shattering scream. Lord Breckley and Ailey had been having awful arguments, and my relative, who was the housekeeper, worried for Ailey's safety. All the servants rushed to see what was wrong, but they were met at the stairs by Lord Breckley. He was acting very strangely and wouldn't allow any of the servants, including my relative, upstairs. He informed them that Ailey had tripped over and had cried out. The servants went back to bed, disbelieving his excuse, but they had learned to keep their mouths shut if they wanted to keep their jobs. The next morning, Ailey was absent from the kitchen where she usually ate her breakfast. The servants wondered at this and were suspicious that the master had finally gone too far and had done away with her in the night. For weeks, there was no sign of Ailey, and life at the townhouse went on as usual. That is, until the noises and wailing started. Every night at just about 10 p.m., the same time that Ailey had first screamed out, terrible shrieks and a moaning would be heard. The voice, obviously that of a woman, screamed and cried and begged for mercy. But for this poor soul, there obviously was to be none. This went on for several months, until what was left of the household staff decided to see if they could discover the cause of the terrible moans. When the moaning began that night, the staff gathered up their courage and followed the direction of the sound. They came upon the master's chambers and heard a horrible wail from within. The master, unable to stand the wailing, had gone to his country house in Yorkshire. When they pushed open the door, they all almost died of fright, for there, standing in the middle of the room, was Ailey, her eyes hollow and devoid of life, her arms outstretched as if pleading for help. The housekeeper stepped forward and tried to grab her hand. For a moment, Ailey was solid. Then she motioned toward the closet and disappeared. The household staff, after they got over the shock, looked in and around the closet but could not find what the ghostly Ailey had wanted them to find. The master returned, and the housekeeper informed him of what they had seen. The master turned white as a ghost, and the next day fired all the servants and put the house up for sale. Through the years, the visits of the poor Ailey have continued. Every night at 10 p.m. she begins to moan until someone finds her. Then she points to what once was the closet door, then vanishes. No one knows what happened to Ailey or why. Some, in fact, speculate that Lord Breckley murdered her, stuffed her body in a secret compartment in the closet, and became horrified when his secret was almost discovered. Many believe other things, but the world will never know. And again, that was The Mistress, submitted by Anonymous in Ohio, USA, October of 1997. And I loved that story. What did you think? Did you like it?
Yeah, if there was ever a good old-fashioned ghost story, you definitely found it. I mean, that had everything.
So I particularly liked that story for a couple of reasons. And both of those reasons are actually the same reason.
It's a 2-for-1 reason day.
Yes, that story reminds me of two different stories, both of them in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark.
Oh, yeah?
They're both kind of that same idea about a ghost looking for retribution or for their body to be found or whatever. So the haunted house actually was always my favorite story in the books. In this story, there's a woman's ghost that's haunting this house and is always coming up the stairs and, terrifying whoever's in the house and pointing people, to go look in the cellar, basically. And, spoiler alert, that's where she's buried. She was murdered and she's buried in the cellar. So it totally reminded me of that. But it reminds me of the bride in the second book. The reason it reminded me of the bride, even though she wasn't murdered, they were playing hide and go seek at their wedding reception, and she got into a big trunk and the lid fell on her head and knocked her unconscious and locked, and they never found her, and she had died in this trunk. And there's not really a ghost in this story, interestingly. I just realized that, but it just reminded me of that with this woman with Ailey pointing to the closet. It's like she wants her body to be found, or she at least wants people to know what happened to her so that she can rest easy. So that's why I really liked that story.
I also felt there were shades of What Lies Beneath.
Mm-hmm.
The story of a haunting that takes place almost immediately after the death of the person and doesn't wait 300 years to sort of come into being.
Right. Well, because they're looking for, retribution. They want the person who did this to them to pay for it. They want their body to be found and their story to be known. Yeah, I think that's a very classic ghost story idea. And in some ways, I feel like these ghosts looking for, some kind of closure to their story, they're almost a little more terrifying because this is someone with a purpose. It's not Like a lot of hauntings, you hear, oh, this is probably just an impression. It's just kind of a recording on the location. It's not actually like a conscious, entity. But if this is somebody who's coming back night after night, or, once a year when it happened or whatever, and like actively making some kind of a bid for the people around them to find them and bring closure, that denotes consciousness and purpose and motive and the ability to manipulate your surroundings and
well, I think
that's scary.
I think that what scares people the most about ghost stories is not necessarily that they're going to be pursued by a ghost or, possessed necessarily, but that they might one day come back as a ghost themselves. That's the more terrifying aspect of all ghostly legends, is that would you want to spend eternity stuck in the same place, sort of doomed to repeat the same cycle over and over again?
I like to think that those ones, that seem like they're stuck on a loop, I like to think that that's probably more like a recorded impression on the environment and not so much like a Sisyphean punishment on that individual ghost. Like Anne Boleyn running up and down the halls with her head under her arm. What did she do to deserve that? It should be Henry VIII running up and down the halls with his head under his arm.
It should be. So
I choose to believe that Anne Boleyn was not punished with that ending to her story.
Yeah,
that it's just more of an impression on the environment.
I'm perfectly comfortable accepting that that's just a BS story that somebody made up.
What?
Just with not of her losing her head, but of the haunting.
What? No.
Her running up and down the halls with her head in her hands.
No. That has been documented for a long time now.
So, okay, then.
That's a thing that people see and experience.
So if you believe that, then what is it? Because it's not going to be like a glitch in the Matrix.
Why not?
Tape loop of something that happened, because she never did run up and down the halls with her head in her hands in life.
That's a good point.
So that would have to be something that, unless, of course, in her dying moment, that was a psychic thing that occurred with her.
Well, maybe she is doing it, but I can't, I don't see why she would be made to do that for the rest of her life, or the rest of her death, I guess. But I'm bumped. Maybe it is actually her, and she is haunting, and she is, actively choosing to do so, but she's pissed off, and she's like, I am going to terrify anybody around here because they let this happen, and she doesn't realize that we're now hundreds of years on. And
yeah, well, that's just the thing, is that a lot of times I'll hear these stories of hauntings that took place, or that the genesis of the haunting was some grave injustice that happened to somebody like 700 years ago.
Right. They're pissed off about it.
And from where we are now, it's really easy to sort of think, oh, how quaint, and ooh, she got her head chopped off.
Oh yeah, that's real quaint.
Well, no, I mean, I'm just saying that if you reflect back on something that happened 500 years ago, it doesn't have the emotional impact that it had on the day. Mm-hmm. And I can imagine that for some sort of, injustice to occur, or some sort of violent act to occur like that, I mean, if it happened now, we would think it was the worst thing in the world,
mm-hmm.
right? And somehow, because we're 500 years removed from it,
mm-hmm.
it's like looking at old pictures of Jack the Ripper victims. I can look at them, and it's like I'm seeing them through the filter of time, and they're not as impactful as if I were to see a victim.
Well, it removes their humanity.
Yeah, and that's sad.
Yeah.
And maybe that's one of the reasons why, if there's any truth to that story, that she does that. I think a lot of times too that spirits who remain, if that is in fact what they do so of their own volition.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like you've cursed yourself to that
mm-hmm.
fate forevermore. There's so many different types of hauntings that I wouldn't be surprised if every single one of them had to do with something completely different.
Yeah, of course.
In the fabric of reality.
Yeah. Well, and I think you say forevermore, but I mean, you got to think, it's just like we were talking about in the last episode, that eternity is a really long time and it's hard to wrap your mind about, around it. But when you're dead for eternity now, right? And that's a real long time. And so the fact that Anne Boleyn's been running around with her head under her arm for hundreds of years now, I'm sure that when you're staring down eternity, hundreds of years is nothing. So, she's doing her little thing for now, and she might get tired of it and move on at some point. And suddenly there's no more Anne Boleyn running up and down the halls, screaming with her head under her arm.
What do you think would happen if the unthinkable were to occur and the planet is struck by some sort of massive cosmic,
like an asteroid
thing, and is completely destroyed, right? What happens then? I mean, once the Earth is no longer here and those places are gone, completely scrubbed from existence, what happens to those hauntings? In other words, then, are they only tied there because the place is still there? Or if they if they destroyed the castle and, put in a parking lot, put in a mall.
Well, okay. I mean, that's, if a tree falls in the woods and there's no one around, does it make a sound, right? If there's nobody around to experience a haunting, does the thing actually still happen?
It's like a radio signal. A radio signal needs a receptor.
Right.
In order to actually, be something. Otherwise, it's just
signal. Floating around in the air without, right. So I think that's kind of the unknowable question. You can't know if there's a haunting, if there's no one around to experience it. But our experience doesn't, I don't think that our experience is the difference between energy continuing or energy dissipating out into nothingness. Energy is energy, and it's gonna, energy's gonna do what energy's gonna do, whether you're there to experience it or not.
Yeah, it makes sense. In a strange way, the insensible makes sense through that prism of your presentation.
Well, it's just like that movie, The Ghosts of Mars. There's nobody on Mars, so what's the ghost doing up there on Mars?
That's not what the movie's about.
Well, I didn't see it. I'm just going on the title.
Well, I didn't see it either, but I'm like, did I see it?
I don't know. Write to us and tell us what The Ghosts of Mars is about.
If you've seen that movie, please tell us if we should watch it.
And if it's actually about ghosts, like haunting Mars, then I'll watch it.
It could be cool.
Yeah. Anyway.
There was some eerie stuff in The Martian Chronicles, that old 1979 or early 80s Rock Hudson miniseries based on the Ray Bradbury book. I remember seeing some creepy, ghostly stuff.
Oh, yeah?
Might be worth a look again.
Yeah.
Let's check it out.
For sure.
And speaking of watching things, I have something to share with you.
You do?
I found another really cool video.
Okay.
This has to do with a dog being pushed across the floor.
What?
By a ghost.
Oh, like a poltergeist style.
Yes, except in this case it's not Carol Ann. The dog is called Tucker.
Is he wearing a helmet?
No, but he should be. Oh. Because this is a little bit spooky. Now, I don't know. You can't believe everything you read on the internet, but can you believe the things that you see on the internet? Especially if there's no production value that could possibly explain a special effect. You know what I mean? Sometimes you look at something, you can tell right away that that's totally fake.
Right.
But
yeah.
There's this video that I saw that was posted to YouTube 11 days ago.
Okay.
And it's called Ghost Moves Dog Across the Floor in Viral Spooky Video. According to the description, the video comes from a Redditor who shared a home video of something strange happening in her house.
Let me see.
And I'll post a link to this video in the show notes so that everybody can check it out and let us know what they think is going on in this video. But I know for somebody who's sort of skeptical about the things that I see on YouTube that are, presented as being evidence of ghostly activity, this one's kind of cool. So I'm going to play it for you, Jane. I'm going to hand you the phone and let you make heads or tails out of this.
Okay. Let me see. Oh, that's a big dog. I thought it was going to be like a... Whoa.
Right? Explain what you're seeing.
So it's a fairly sizable dog, probably 50 pounds or so.
Just kind of standing in the kitchen or the living room barking.
Living room. And it looks like a carpeted floor. And the dog's barking like it looks confused and scared. And it kind of looks like the hair on the neck is up a little bit. It's not a short hair dog. So when you were talking about the dog being pulled across the floor, I thought, yeah, but if I see like, if it's a short hair dog, that's one thing. But if it's a long hair dog, you'd be able to see if there's like, a harness or some kind of thing pulling it across the floor. But it's not a short hair dog. So the dog is kind of barking. Then you see the front legs. It's almost like it got pushed from behind, just like about a foot. The dog just moves like about a foot.
But it moves toward the camera, and there's nothing behind it on the other side.
Yeah, that's creepy. It might be more like 18 inches. Yeah, the dog's definitely unhappy with the situation, but it doesn't appear to be, it's not being hurt, and it didn't look like it had been pulled. You could see if a dog was being pulled, like if there were a harness around its chest and it were being pulled, the shoulder would come forward and like the head would move backwards a little bit. You'd be able to see where it's being pulled from, but it looks more like the dog is being pushed from behind, but you can clearly see there's nobody behind it. That's really creepy.
And it's not a natural action of the dog. It's not, the dog can't moonwalk sideways.
No, the front feet get pushed like 18 inches sideways. So it's not like the dog lost its footing. That's a really creepy video. If anyone, has any input or just you want to tell us your opinion on that, what you think it was, email us at cosghostkeepers@gmail.com or on the contact page on our website. I know I'm really thirsty for emails today, and you know what? Zero shame.
Shameless.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of that video, Vince? What's your take on it?
You know me.
Well, I'm not saying that it absolutely is paranormal, but I'm saying it's creepy and I don't see an explanation for it.
It's definitely weird.
Yeah.
It just seems that the dog is possibly interacting with something that's not there. That's why it's barking.
Yeah.
It's barking like toward the floor.
Well, it's kind of, there was a little bit of that. But it also seems to be kind of aimlessly barking. Like it doesn't know something is tormenting it and it doesn't know where it is. That's kind of how it looked to me.
And then it basically gets shoved and slides across the floor. And it doesn't, it's not a special effect. It's very, very.
I don't know. I need to see it again, actually. I have an idea of.
You're going to debunk this thing?
I'm going to see. I have an idea that I didn't look for the first time, something that could be causing it. So let me watch it again real quick.
I mean, is it possible that they could have rigged some sort of harness on the other side of the dog and maybe pulled it with fishing wire and maybe done 100 different takes?
Yeah, the hackles are definitely up on this dog's neck. So the idea that I had was, maybe the dog was standing on a rug. And what you don't see is that the rug is being pulled forward. But no, it's carpet, and there's a rug on top of the carpet. The carpet is wall-to-wall carpet. There's a bookshelf on top of it. So but that's kind of how it pulls forward, right, Vince? If you picture that dog standing on a rug and the rug gets pulled, that's exactly how it moves forward. Hey, you know what? It could be. There could be a sheet of plastic or something that we don't see.
I was thinking about that too.
Yeah, because that is how the dog moves forward. It's like the carpet underneath it gets pulled. But I don't see anything, but...
Anyway, I don't know. I'm open to other opinions. So if you guys watch this video, I'll have the link in the show notes. Check it out and let us know what you think.
Do let us know. Because we want this podcast to be a conversation between all of us, not just me and Vince. We get tired of talking to each other.
Yeah,
so
we really do.
Conversate with us, please. So, yeah, I think that brings episode 8 of the Castle of Spirits podcast to a close. Vince, what do you have to say about it?
8 is one more than 7.
It is one more than 7.
But it is one less than 9.
Mm-hmm.
And we will be back with episode number 9
next
week.
And guess what?
What?
We have something special planned for episode 10.
Do we? What is it?
I can't, no spoilers.
Well, I guess if I don't know, then...
Well, I did tell you about it.
No, I forgot.
We will make an announcement about episode 10 soon because we are going to be requiring your participation.
All right.
It's going to be a themed episode.
An audience participation?
An audience participation.
Are we going to have people over?
Episode. No.
Can we have pizza?
We can have pizza. But you can't eat it on the microphone because that's gross.
Then forget it.
Okay. So, if you need more Castle of Spirits, make sure you head to castleofspirits.com where you can pick through the entire 25-year-old library archive of 4,600 and growing stories. And make sure while you're there to check out the attic, where you'll find all kinds of movies, books, music, things like that we recommend to get you in the spooky mood. And then, of course, make sure you check out the lounge where we will have episode-specific conversation starters that you can participate in, or you can just straight up email us. And, as always, the most important part, please submit your paranormal stories to the Castle of Spirits. Yes, it's good enough. Yes, you are a good enough writer. Yes, we want stories about that too. It does not have to be about ghosts. It can be anything that might be considered paranormal in any way. Send it to us.
I want to hear your UFO stories. I want to hear time slip stories.
Yeah, we don't have enough time slip stories on the website. There's a few UFO stories. No time slip stories. Give us your time slip stories, friends.
Ever had anything weird happen? Talk to us. We want to hear about it. Let us know.
You can talk to us. You can be anonymous. You could make up a name. We don't care. So in the lounge this week, for this podcast, for this episode, our questions will be about the Wendigo. Have you experienced a Wendigo? Do you have additional information about the Wendigo you'd like to share? Retribution ghosts. Have you ever experienced one? Do you have additional stories about a retribution ghost that you would like to share?
Do you plan on exacting retribution when you're off the earth?
That's a good one.
And whom will you be haunting and why?
Here's a good question.
All right.
If you were going to haunt something for eternity, what would your haunting style be? Would you go Anne Boleyn and just like shriek and run around with your head under your arm and terrify everyone? Or would you just be the slow, quiet ghost who walks through a wall and disappears? Tell us about your chosen haunting style if you got to be a ghost.
But if you do that, Can you switch back and forth? Because I think I would be the Anne Boleyn thing is like a blunt force haunting. You know?
Sometimes she has her head and sometimes she doesn't. So there's a little switching back and forth there.
What I would want to do is at first appear at the end of a really dark hallway as a shadow that's moving really strangely and approaching. And other times, you know, once the guard of the living has been lowered and they say, oh, it's just a shadow at the end of the hall, then you appear right in their face screaming at the top of your lungs.
Oh, that's really over the top. If I were a ghost, I would like to be just like the creepy, flowy thing that
lives in the attic?
No, just like glides down the hall and goes through the wall where there's not a door and makes you think, oh, there must have been a door here at one point, and, you know.
Sort of an ethereal tour guide to the past.
Little confusing, definitely spooky, you know.
Just like you are in life.
Right. Anyway, folks, thank you for listening to this episode, and we will be right back in your faces with episode 9 very soon.